What's up? What's up, people? Hey, thank you once again for coming and taking a journey with me at the Pew Pew Cafe. And today we are elated to have very good USCCA firearm instructor that happens to be an attorney in the area of Pittsburgh, the Steel City. That's right, you guys. The one and only Tammy Bivins has stepped into the Pew Pew Cafe. And in this episode, we will be talking about different things about what happens before, during, and after a self defense situation. She is someone who has been in the courtroom in different aspects of the law, but she's also a USCCA firearms instructor, mother of two in the Steel City. So yeah, man, we're going to get down into this episode and have a conversation. So hey, I want everybody to welcome Miss Tammy Bivins. Hey, welcome, Tammy. How you doing this morning?
Good morning, good morning, good morning. I am doing fantastic this morning. And first and foremost, I want to thank you for the invitation to participate in this introductory conversation. I am so elated to be a part of and to participate and to be on the Pew Pew Cafe.
And hey, we are happy to have you. So, one of the things we like to ask, and one of the most important questions of the day, is what's in your cup?
I'm just going to say that a lady doesn't tell.
Okay, okay. Well, hey, a gentleman gets into it. So I got the black coffee today. And honestly and truly, since I am on vacation today, I am proud to say I got a little of the nearest green in the cup in my black coffee today. Once again, thanks again to Nearest Green and Nearest Green family for a fine premium beverage. Hey, so man, once again, thank you for coming in, sitting down with us. And so, one thing we like to do at the Pew Pew Cafe is have real conversations with real people, non-scripted. We kind of do it off the cuff. And so, man, so first and foremost, tell the people who you are and what you do. How did you become a USCCA firearms instructor, get into law, all that? I mean, tell the people a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Right, thank you. So, as you mentioned, I am an attorney here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I've been an attorney for over 30 years, and I've had a pretty diverse background. However, just to, bring together the being attorney and becoming a USCCA instructor, for almost 10 years, I practiced in the juvenile division in Allegheny County. And, one of the things I noticed in my dealings with young people was that just how frequently young people are exposed to firearms. Of course, I defended, young people who were charged with firearm related offenses. And, at the end of the day, these kids, they don't know what they're doing with firearms. But what I learned was just how much not only the young people don't know, but clearly their parents don't know as well because they weren't educating them. So I left that particular area, but then, having been exposed to just some of the information behind firearm safety by a premier firearm or USCCA firearms instructor who provided me just some of the fundamental information regarding gun safety. And so I decided to start Swift Transitions with a goal of educating young people, but mainly educating women, educating mothers, because mothers are the first teacher. And so I believe if I can get the fundamental information to these mothers, then that information can trickle down because we know, quite often, although fathers are very significant, but, mothers have a huge role in just teaching their children. And so that's my focus, teaching women and teaching children to just make this place safer when it comes to, using a firearm.
Okay. So on your journey to becoming a USCCA firearms instructor, like did that come from a place whereas you grew up learning how to shoot and shooting outdoors and things of that nature, or is this something like a recent thing that you got into?
This component is recent. I am a veteran. I was Army reservist. And so I've been exposed to firearms since I was a teenager, actually. And so I know a little bit, but I've just moved away from it. However, again, just seeing the impact on our communities with young people and really people being injured or actually dying as a result of gun violence. And although, you can't change the mindset of someone who is set on committing a crime. However, what you can do is teach or provide tools for people to use if they're in a situation where they may be exposed to an individual with ill intent or being exposed to someone who's just reckless and who doesn't know how to properly and safely use a firearm so that there's no unintended harm or even death.
So what I'm hearing is that a lot of people get it wrong where they look at the firearm as something other than just being a tool, no different than a hammer or a knife or anything else. Especially with the younger generation, which we see that a lot, right? We see it in the news, we see it on social media. So what has been one of the biggest challenges as an instructor that you see out of, let's just say, primarily women who come to your class and they want to take your class? Is there a fear that they have, or what is a perspective that you've seen, especially from mothers or female shooters?
I think you're right. A lot of people come with a fear, which I love having those students who express that at the onset, because a lot of times there is a fear of just the unknown. And they're some are afraid about the sound. And what I hear frequently is that, people are reluctant to even own a firearm because they feel like they have a bad temper and, their temper will get the best of them and, they'll use a firearm and then have regrets. And, I appreciate the honesty. And actually, I remember having that own belief about myself. But, once you take a class, take a quality class, and USCCA has a fantastic curriculum. Take the first step is just to be willing and open to be trained and to not let that fear stifle you. And so I have people who say that at the beginning, but at the end of the class, they're ready. They're a lot more confident with just having education. And so they're more comfortable with taking the steps to protect their families, to own a firearm and, be in a better position to protect their families.
No, absolutely. One of the things that we get over here for MLW Consulting, and that we see at the Pew Pew Cafe when we do our range days and things of that nature, we always hear, "Man, I was in the Army, or I've been in the Marine Corps, or the Air Force, or in the Navy, and I've shot all kind of pistols and rifles." And the first thing you see is that they're not holding the pistol right. They're a little more afraid of it because it's been some time. I mean, the honest truth of the matter is there are some people who, after basic, their MOS, or they is not to be a GI Jane, or Rambo or anything like that. They're a clerk, and they have to qualify once or twice a year, and that's it. They don't see it very often. And then two, I think TV and social media has a lot of people feeling like this is really easy to do, that the shooting sports is not a real thing. They think anyone could pick a pistol up or a rifle up, and it's easy. There are people who spend a lot of time perfecting their craft and their skill. So I know during our conversations, you train quite often. So tell me what your training regimen looks like. How do you stay sharp?
Uh, just spending a lot of time on the range and just working independently to identify and utilize resources that focus on just skill training. One thing about using a firearm is kind of what you've alluded to, is it is a skill. If you don't use it, you're going to lose it. And so it definitely behooves you to continue training, continue using it, to continue going to the range, continue working on enhancing your skills.
Absolutely. So I know that, Pittsburgh, the Steel City is one of those. Well, I think Pennsylvania is an open carry state. I think their laws are a lot different than California and Florida and New York and New Jersey. I mean, they're all somewhat different. So, in your opinion, is there a misconception of for young people to feel like, hey, it's my right. I can buy this pistol, have it on me because I don't have to have a concealed carry license. But I do know that there are certain things in Pennsylvania that you have to have, and I'm not sure what that is. Even though I'm wearing the hat, I don't know what the course of action is in order to be able to legally carry in the state of Pennsylvania. Can you can you touch on that just a little bit?
Right. Yeah. So I don't want to get specifically into the laws here, but I will say that to conceal carry, you do need to have you need a license.
Oh, okay,
One thing that's training is not required in Pennsylvania. And I absolutely support and believe in our constitutional rights, um, believe in the Second Amendment. However, I wish that people would recognize how important training is. Gun, firearm, it's an inanimate object. You sit it, it's on a table. It's for the most part, it's nothing is going to happen. It's going to sit there. But getting in the hands, it becomes dangerous when it's in the hands of someone who is not trained. Period. When you think about just the universal safety rules, you know, even if on that very basic level, if people were aware of those rules, then that can significantly reduce the incidence of accidental discharges or innocent people being harmed. But yeah, so I mean, for the most part here in Pennsylvania, pass a background check and, pay a fee, and
sure.
you are technically able to own a firearm.
Yeah. Oh, and that's the scary part about certain states that have open carry and where even you can conceal carry without taking training or knowing, doing your research. They feel like if you got the money, hey, you can have it and you can carry it, even if you're carrying it wrong. One of the things that we recently seen was, I believe it was Texas, where people going on spring break and they got firearms and big crowds of people and things like that. And there's specific laws about a certain number of people being in a certain space. You shouldn't have a firearm. But then when something breaks out, a lot of young people, they find themselves in bad situations. So knowing the law is important because I feel like that could jam you up. The law is just and sometimes somewhat, is blind in a way, in the sense that there's specific parameters, right, that people have to follow in different states. And if you don't take the time to know what those laws are, it's kind of like reciprocity. When I travel, I know going to certain states, I can't have it at all. If I didn't know that and just went there, I can find myself hemmed up in a bad situation. So, um, one of the things that I know that you do specifically, because we talk about it and we've done it before, and we talk about training. You have one of these from Ace Shooting. So tell me, what your Ace Shooting experience was initially. Were you a little apprehensive on starting? Talk to us about your Ace Shooting experience, and don't get it twisted. We love Ace Shooting sports, and it's actually helped me become a better shooter. So yeah, talk about that.
Yes, ace shooting was fun, and I love the interactive nature of it. I think it helped with accuracy, and it's a great tool to use just to make you more comfortable with, yeah, pretty much with accuracy. Yeah, and I think that it is, when you think about enhancing your skill level, you
Yeah,
know,
speed
because
and precision.
sometimes you're not, for whatever reason, you might not want to get to the range or go to the range, or, you have such a busy schedule, it's a little bit harder to fit it in. And so with using that type of resource, you can do that at 1 o'clock in the morning, you know,
Yeah.
in the basement or like between, other. events or places that you have to be. So definitely, yeah, I think it's worth the investment if you're able to do it. Like there's you want to have again a variety of tools that you can use to enhance your skills.
When I got my ace shooting pistol and VR experience, I was excited, first and foremost, because I'd seen it at a couple of USCCA expos and things of that nature. And because we live in such a cold weathered state where it's rainy, it's snowy, it's this or that, we have a short window of summer and fall. I was excited to be able to do this in my home and, also speed and accuracy was something I wanted to improve on. This allowed me to do that. And then, also, you know, other people in my household to also be able to do this and not have to load everything up in the car and go buy ammo, and
Mhm.
go buy targets before you get to the range or spend a significant amount of money going to the range, which sometimes is a deterrent for people to actually shoot more. Um, we 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 do the VR thing, and a lot of people who have influencers that I've met, they're also on, the ace shooting VR experience where you can shoot with people who actually shoot better than you, which makes you better, right? So
A lot of fun. I mean, doing the VR, it's very enjoyable.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So let's talk about training versus reality. Okay. So, because we know violent encounters happen fast, right? What is your take on training versus reality and why training is so important before and hopefully you never get to like the reality part, be in a violent situation, but talk to us about your thoughts on training versus reality.
Training is critical because at the end of the day, if you're going to own a firearm and you do not want the first time that you're using that firearm to be when you are having to defend yourself in an encounter. That's just like, from a female standpoint, you think about, like the real cute, very high heel pair of shoes, and you have an event. You don't want the first time that you're trying those shoes out to be when you're actually out at the event because what's going to happen, those shoes are going to come off a lot sooner than you would
Or
have. But,
or as people who
you
don't
know,
wear high heel shoes, that's a very good example.
right.
Uh,
So, but anyway, but yes, you want to, there are certain aspects of using a firearm that you have to get used to, like trigger management, um, even like the recoil, understanding and becoming familiar with your firearm's recoil. And so, yeah, I think training is key because there's so many aspects of training that are necessary to use your firearm safely. For instance, if you look at like self-defense, quite often we hear quite often that people use their firearm to defend themselves. Like there's a thought process even in that. Like, is this a situation where this level of force is necessary in this particular situation? And if you're not properly trained, you're not properly educated on self defense, what that means, then yes, you might just pop off. Like, oh, yeah, oh, I didn't feel safe. Well, what does that mean? That's all a part of the training. It goes beyond the use of the firearm, but it's like educating yourself. It's also educating yourself on self defense and what's required to for self defense claim in your particular state. Additionally, one of the aspects of firearm safety training that I appreciate the most is the education regarding avoiding confrontation, avoiding the opportunity or an incident in which you may have to use your firearm. Learning about situational awareness. That's all a part of the training. At the end of the I had a misconception that people who own firearms were just, gung ho and, it was always like just shoot them up. yeah, I want to shoot every chance that I have. But what I learned and what I enjoy sharing with people is good, really quality firearms safety training organizations focus on safety first. They focus on avoiding situations in which you have to use your firearm. And that's the key. You want to avoid to the best that you're able. Additionally, people aren't really aware of the possible implications of using your firearm in a what you determine to be a defensive situation. Because at the end of the day, it's the courts are not going to look at it about what you necessarily believe. They're going to look at it based on what a reasonable person would believe. So there's so many levels. There's so many levels to training, and I would encourage anyone who is who has a firearm in their home, particularly if they're young people in your house, to get trained. Find USCCA has a wonderful, wonderful training programs. And so find a USCCA instructor or class, in your local area.
We try to tell people that taking the class, even if your state doesn't require you to have a quote unquote CPL license or concealed carry license, that there's so much in knowing like situational awareness, conflict avoidance, things like that. And what we see out of our young people today, and then maybe we're the same way. I don't know back in the day. I mean, I was a little bit off the cuff, but I never ran towards a situation or a problem where, I always erred on the side of caution, where I feel like young people today are doing it for the gram. They're doing it for the book, where they want to be the first person to record something and so forth. And, when you have a firearm, you can't be the first person on the scene, with your camera, and you can't be the person that's going to be quote unquote the hero. And even as adults, I mean, it's situational awareness that plays a huge role into everything we just talked about. Knowing if you go to a restaurant, you sit down, are you sitting with your back to the door? I mean, all those things come into play. I personally like to see who's coming in, who's going out, where's the exit, so I have an exit strategy. And some people think that is overkill. They think it's paranoia. What is your thoughts on that?
Wow. Situational awareness is so critical because, again, you want to avoid um, confrontation that could result in injury or death. I always say, what is your number one goal when you leave your house in the morning? That number one goal should be to make it back in the same condition, basically, that you left in. And the best way to do that is to make sure that you are paying attention to your surroundings, paying attention, just to what's going on around you, just being smart. You reference like young people. And I know one of the things that, we see these young people recording videos. So they're making music and they've got the videos and they have, the guns. I saw a lot of these videos, as a juvenile offender, but these videos where they're guns, they have, these weapons in their hand and they're, kind of waving them around. And there's somebody who's recording this
Yep,
and just not having the knowledge that, what, you got to assume that that firearm is loaded, number one, but that's a very dangerous situation or position to put yourself in. And so, again, situational awareness is looking at what's going on around you, like, hey, there's a firearm here. And whether I or not, if that firearm is loaded, I've got to assume that it is. And so, hmm, so right there, you're in a condition where you are vulnerable. You're a vulnerable victim, really, or you're
yep,
you're vulnerable to be victimized. And so, putting yourself in that type of a position, you might not make it home. You might not
yep.
make it back at the end of the day. So yes, but again, if you're just paying attention to what's going on around you. And once you learn, that's something that once you learn, like that's going to stick with you. But that's all a part of, participating in a training. Again, particularly if you know either that you own a firearm or even, as I mentioned about even mothers, if you live in a community where there is a lot of gun violence, then you want to learn how to keep yourself and your the young people in your house safe. But yeah, so again, at the end of the day, it's really all about safety.
Yeah, I wonder, because you touched on something there, and I don't. I think more people are doing it now. Where I'm wondering how many people are actually teaching their young people, their your children per se, about situational awareness and knowing what dangers are, because dangers now look completely different than how they did 20 years ago. Some things have evolved. I ain't gonna say that they're different. They've evolved, meaning somebody walks up to your door, rings your doorbell, and you got a young person there, and they open the door. They're not trained that stranger danger, and that's all. That's as a parent, part of your training is to make your children aware of certain dangers. And people say paranoia. I don't just because they start with P's are not the same. Paranoia and preparedness is completely two separate things, right? So, I think as an instructor, one of the things that through the USCCA training, we learn how to protect our home. That is not just about concealed carry, it's home defense and concealed carry fundamentals. So I know as you're teaching, there are a lot of people that are probably having a aha moment or whoa, I didn't realize that. So can you give me a story during one of your classes where one of your students probably had a had a I didn't realize that moment as you were like the look on their face or you know can you give me one of those moments? I know we've had our own where you know case in point, young people who take our class, they get a little thrown off that they feel like the firearm is the great equalizer, or not even the great equalizer. It allows them to be the law or the orchestrator of bad behavior. Like, you know, hey man, somebody cut me off and I got this pistol, man. I'm gonna go up there and put this in their face so that they never do that again. I'm not gonna shoot them, but I'm gonna basically say, hey, this could have happened. And they don't realize that they're breaking the law. That's just one example of something we've dealt with where like, man, so what is having a license good for if I can't do all these other things? Have you ran into a similar situation or anything like that?
I don't have a particular isolated situation. However, what I will say is that people learn a lot about personal safety in the training. If it's whoever's providing, but if it's a quality training, they learn a lot. Even learning about the different aspects of situational awareness, being in the various conditions.
Mhm.
People are it's very rewarding as a teacher, as an instructor, when the students are like, wow, wow. I find that throughout. And even like people learning like self-defense and, how much is involved with that and, who's ultimately making the decisions or even the impact of you being in a defensive situation and having to use the firearm, because a lot of people have this misconception that they can just shoot a person and what they deem as self-defense and then just go home and everything is going to be cool because I felt threatened. But learning the impact, from a financial standpoint, from an emotional standpoint, from, the legal standpoint, and realizing how much goes into it and how your life can be impacted. And so, as I mentioned before, how, people would say, again, as I thought as well, like, oh, well, my temper, and I would probably just, do whatever, to get I feel threatened, I'm just gonna shoot or whatever. But because of my temper, maybe I shouldn't have a firearm. But once you learn the extent to which your life can be impacted in a defensive situation, then yes, and you feel like I can own a firearm and I'm not going to necessarily just use it, you know?
Mhm.
And again, situations happen very quickly.
Right.
We all know that. But again, that ties into the situational awareness. And so maybe if you are in a defensive situation, you've still exercised an awareness and you are actually in a position where you have to defend yourself. But you know, and you feel comfortable and comfort in knowing that you attempted to avoid that situation. And so it's kind of a last resort. And I mean, ultimately, that will help you, defend the actions that you took in that particular situation.
Yeah, I think what you know, one thing you were describing was the aftermath, what we call the aftermath. People don't they don't take that into account that because that's not the part you see on TV, right? Unless you're watching Lifetime. That's completely separate. That there's a whole nother side of it. There's the court process, there's the financial toll, there's the emotional toll that comes into play that you don't think about. Like 2 seconds could change your entire life and your loved ones' lives because a lot of times they're riding with you, right? Financially and emotionally and everything else. And we had a person that took our class and they were involved in a incident and, mind you, everybody kind of came out the other side really, you know, um, no one was unalived in the situation. However, the emotional toll that this person went through was critical. I mean, it took them months and months to recover just being in that situation. And I think a lot of times people think of it in the sense of having PTSD. They think that's a term for law enforcement or soldiers or, firefighters, things like that. They don't think of it in the sense that that emotional toll can affect any of us and any of us can have PTSD. So I think when we're teaching a class, it's one of the things, we're talking about the mental, emotional things that you go through, the aftermath, and sometimes the look on people's faces as you're teaching this in their class, there's probably 50% of them are thinking, yeah, nah, it'll never happen to me. But you don't know what you don't know until you are in that situation. Then you're in the thick of it and it's too late. And um, as an instructor, what are some of what is like one key thing that you want your students to take away when they leave your out of your presence? They've done the shooting portion, they've done the book portion, and like when they're on their journey home, what is one thing that you want them to take away from your class or thought that they have like specifically from taking Swift Transitions class?
I want my students to walk away with two things. And number one, as I mentioned before, that they want to return home at the end of the day in the same condition that they left in. That's number one. And number two, I want them to understand that they have power and control over their power control and they are responsible for their personal safety. And
Nice.
so I want them to walk away with the satisfaction that they have been provided with tools and information to ensure that they are armed for their personal safety and the safety of their loved ones. So those are the main things. That's my specific goal. And we know that it's possible.
Mhm.
We absolutely know that it's possible. So yeah. And I have not had a class yet, where people are not walking away with that level of confidence and assurance that, you know what, I can do this.
Okay. Hey, on this show, we like to do something called rapid fire, which is just questions for you. And so, you ready? You ready for the rapid fire questions here? Uh, okay. You ready?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, let me take a little swig first, make sure my voice sounds crispy. All right. Rapid fire. So, one myth about self defense law. Like, give me one myth.
Well, one myth is that, as I referenced before, that you can shoot someone, feel with self-defense, and you can just go home and go on about your business without any impact to you. And yeah,
Okay.
that's I don't know how much you want me to elaborate, but yeah, that's the answer. That's the myth that it's based on what you feel. You can just go home and you're good.
Hey, man, they get to go home on TV all the time. Uh,
That is not the reality.
one thing every gun owner should know.
At a bare minimum, one thing that every gun owner should know would be the universal safety rules. I'll just package that, but the one thing, at a minimum, they should know the universal safety rules.
Okay. One mistake that could ruin your life legally. One mistake.
Using your firearm in a situation in which the condition, the circumstances did not warrant you using that firearm. And that's as minimum even as exposing the firearm.
Okay. Your opinion of the best female action movie with a lady shooter. And I don't even know if you're an action movie person, but that's a
And
great question. I don't care how far you got to go back.
wow. I Cam Greer keeps coming to
I
mind.
knew you was going to say Pam Grier. I knew it. They've made other movies since then, right? So she was a little off the cuff a little bit, calling people jive turkeys and stuff like that. Come on now, you can come on up, get a little closer to 2020, can't you?
I was trying to think of something, but I was like, that's the name that just kept popping up. So I was like,
Hey, Pam Grier had a dynamite afro and a bad attitude, so it is what it is, right? So, man, we're gonna change the cuff and have I want to know your thoughts because you're an attorney, and one of the things I see, but I want to know your opinion on real talk, legal talk from an attorney versus social media law and barbershop law and hairstylist law because everybody got an
which is
opinion.
not a thing. None of those are real things.
Hey, man, a lot of talk goes on, man. A lot of that stuff goes on. Have you ever run into anything like that where it was like, hey, this person said, I was getting my hair done. They said if I just do ABC 1, 2, 3, and this was the best course of action. Have you ever been approached with like where people come up with these bad advice from people not from the jury, part of it. Like and you probably haven't. I don't know because people know you're an attorney. So like I know you haven't been an attorney your whole life, but
Well, we as attorneys tend to try to stay away from hypotheticals because we don't want, if we are not retained by that person, then we don't want
Mhm.
anything that we say to be construed as legal advice. So basically,
Oh,
in those types of situations, we're not going to give them legal advice. Right. Yeah. So even, currently in the role that I'm in, I'm an educator, but
sure.
I'm not giving legal advice. However, what I will say is that if you are a firearm owner, then, you're a licensed firearm owner, then it's a good idea to have an attorney in your contacts. So in the event that you are in a particular situation, um, you have a quick access to
Mm.
someone who can assist you with steps to take in the event that you're in a situation where you had to use your firearm.
Well, Pookie and Ray Ray and them said at the barbershop they watch all 26 seasons of Law and Order, and they basically good on all that legal stuff. Bad idea, bad idea. So,
Yeah, I think that
um,
the prisons are probably filled with a lot of people who listen to Pookie and Ray Ray and for their legal advice.
probably so.
Yeah, not a good idea. Again, if you get the information, then maybe you want to talk to someone, retain, an attorney to get real advice because the it's serious. Gun ownership is there's a responsibility that goes with that. And there's a responsibility and an expectation that if you are a firearms owner, that you have had some level of training. And
Yeah.
so
Is there any is there such thing as too much training?
I would say no, you know, I would
I
say
would
no
totally
because
agree.
what you're going to do, you're going to either get more information or maybe it'll dispel, but there shouldn't be too many conflicts when it comes to training. There should be more overlap
Mhm.
than, inconsistencies or conflict. Or, maybe if they're inconsistency, then they would be relatively minor. For example, excuse me, some instructors may suggest this stance or versus that stance, you know. So maybe there's inconsistencies there, but just on the foundational information should be consistent.
Okay. Good deal. And maybe you can elaborate on this because I don't really know what it is. I can make the assumption of what a keyboard attorney is. Is that a chat GPT thing where you can look up the law on chat GPT? I know people talk about a keyboard attorney. I don't know what that is.
I've
I don't even know if it's a real thing.
Yeah, I've never
So
heard that.
me neither. I'm
Doesn't
I'm
sound like a
assuming
good idea to Yeah, that's not a real
not a real thing.
I'm not gonna say it's not a real I don't know what that is. I've never heard that term before.
Yeah, yeah, same here. I do know people use chat and Grunk and all these different AI things, but I know it has
That's
good
not legal advice if you're
it's right.
no.
It's just generalization, but not it could be bad information, right? It's not legal information. It's not
I
going to
believe a lot of
hold up in a court of law.
those platforms have disclaimers as well. So yeah,
Uh,
that's if you want legal advice, you contact a licensed attorney.
spoken like a true attorney. So, I know I've had you on here and I appreciate your time. If you could leave one thought to your listeners about leave a thought for the listeners about who you are, what they should do, and then also tell people how to contact you if they want to take the Swift Transitions class in your area. Give them
Yeah.
your information. Give them your information.
Yes, absolutely. As I mentioned, I am in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And so if you're and I own and operate Swift Transition and I do personal one-on-one training as well as classes. I will say, although right in Pennsylvania, training is not required to obtain your concealed carry license. However, that money will be money well spent taking a class. You will come out empowered. You will come out ready to protect yourself and your family and to keep you all safe. And so if you want to reach me, you can reach me at through my website at www.swifttransitions. And you can also find me at Swift Transitions on Instagram. So follow me on Instagram and also through Facebook.
Nice. Good deal. Well, hey, we really appreciate having you out here joining us at the Pew Pew Cafe this morning. And I think you went over a lot of information for people to actually take in. And we'd love to have you on our show again and talk a little more about things you've been up to. I know that you are going to be doing a lot more with the shooting sports and going to certain events throughout the United States here in 2026. So we would love to hear more about those endeavors and new things. And I'd like to get into later on, about what's in your arsenal. What your concealed carry firearm of choice is, and what you're going to the gun for relaxation. What do you like to shoot? Things of that nature. So we would definitely love to have you on the show more to talk about that, and then also talk more about some current events, things that's going on that we're seeing in social media in different states of that nature. Because we all have an opinion about stuff. We just don't get a chance to talk about it. So once again, I would love to thank you for being on our show. And, you did a great job. We loved having you, and know
It
that
was
you can
my
always,
pleasure.
yeah, absolutely. You can always pull up a chair at the Pew Pew Cafe. So, hey, that being said, thanks again. Thanks again. We're going to sign out. Thank you, listeners, for joining us at the Pew Pew Cafe. And we'll be talking to you in the next episode.